know what to do. Okay, so moving right into, from inclusion right into accessibility, I'm going to have Mark Robbins bring up his panel. Mark joins us from the Institute on Governance. His work principally addresses impacts of the digital revolution on government, governance, and public administration, as well as how government itself impacts technological development through its actions for governing the ICT sector. Mark can be found working on a range of projects related to 21st century policy areas, including digital transformation, innovation, digital government, and artificial intelligence. When not writing research, Mark also organizes the IOG's Policy Crunch speaker series and annual feature forum conferences, which are a ton of fun. So prior to joining the IOG, he held various research positions on economic and political affairs, including the Muntz School of the University of Toronto and the Conference Board of Canada, UN Escape, the Canadian Transportation Agency, and the Parliament of Canada. Mark holds a Bachelor of Social Science in Political Science from the University of Ottawa, go GGs, and an MA in Political Economy from Carleton University, go Ravens, and a certificate in Commerce from Mohawk College. You're now going to bring up your fabulous accessibility panel. Everyone, Mark Robbins.
Everyone. Thanks for the very kind and warm introduction. I'll just ask our panelists to come up one by one and they can provide their own introductions. So we have Vidya, Julianna, Marlene, and Thomas. So I'd kindly ask our panelists just to provide a brief introduction, who you are, where you come from, and why is accessibility important to you in the work that you do. Why don't we start with you, Vidya?
Good afternoon. So I'm Vidya Shankarnarayan, and I'm Director General for Digital Design and Digital Government at ISET, which is Innovation, Science and Economic Development, but most of you might know it as Industry Canada. Still, yes. So why am I here? Accessibility is a passion of mine. It's something that I have been working, I would say, in the space, around the space, for about close to 20 years. And there's so much we need to still continue doing on a daily basis in the government to actually get us moving a few steps forward. A lot has been done, but it needs to be basically something that we need to do on a daily basis, and during the panel, I'd love to elaborate.
Hi, is this working? Yes. I'm Julianna Rowsell. I'm the head of accessibility at the Canadian Digital Service. And one of the main reasons that I'm here is that it's really important that we actually are considering persons with disabilities, as well as the fact that most of us, if we're privileged enough to grow old, are going to inherit and grow into having disabilities. So the things that we do now for changing digital access and improving that service is going to benefit everyone. So that's why I'm here to talk about it today.
Marlene Floyd. I'm the National Director of Corporate Affairs for Microsoft here in Canada. Accessibility to me is also a passion. It's something I've been kind of made a personal drive for myself for the last 15 years, and it's been a pleasure to be part of Microsoft as they've kind of continued their journey on accessibility over the last dozen years, and that's why we call it as a journey. From the private sector perspective, we've been building accessibility functions into our products from the ground up, so that no longer is accessibility added on at the end. It's added on at the very beginning and part of our engineering strategies. And it's the right thing to do. And we've found that it's good business sense. 1 billion people in the world have a disability of some sort, either a hidden disability, it could be situational, it could be permanent, it could be temporary. And for us, if 1 in 10 people are not using our products, then it's bad business sense. So for us, there's also, while it's the right thing to do, there's also a huge piece that has to be done on the business side, and why that this is a good choice for companies to be doing.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes? All right. Happy National Accessibility to everyone, or Happy National Accessibility Week to everyone. My name is Thomas Simpson. I'm the head of public affairs at the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, or the CNIB. The CNIB is an organization that's been with Canada now for over 100 years, the leading sight loss organization in the country, providing post-vision loss rehabilitation services and emotional and social support programming for people with sight loss. As my panelists have said everything basically that I was going to say. So accessibility is very important. A lot of, over 25% of people in the country have a disability, and of those people, most people have interacted with someone with a disability in Canada. It's so important that we ensure that accessibility is always front and center in anything that we do, whether it's policy development, technology, implementation and development, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I'm excited to get started with our panel. Thank you.
So, as Marlene mentioned, there's over 1 billion people in the world with some form of disability or another, which if you broke actually into its own country would be one of the largest countries in the world and one of the most fastest growing ones. This is because with an aging population, the needs for accessibility become even larger. So with that said, we can take note that accessibility is of increasing importance for us. How are we doing on that in Canada? Actually, so far, not bad in some ways. We have Bill C-81, which is likely to pass soon, an Accessible Canada Act. We have a first deputy minister of accessible workplace in the Government of Canada. But new opportunities for improving access that come through technology are, on one hand, exciting, but on the other hand, perhaps come with their own risk. With new spurts of technological development, we have the prospects of this development being focused on the median user and perhaps even excluding those who are not in the mainstream, let's say. So for the panel, and feel free to just jump right on in, how do we ensure that accessible technology is user-friendly for people with disabilities? Are there any differences between how the public sector and the private sector might address this? And finally, does digital technology change the nature of accessibility? Or is accessibility still the same concept we've become familiar with for the past 50 or 60 years? Feel free to jump on any part of that question, too.
That was a lot, Mark. That's like 5 different conversations.
Sure, I can start. Is that you spoke about the user friendliness. Is talk to the users. They'll actually tell you. So in my current job, I actually run the digital lab basically for the government, and we talk to users, and they are very open in telling you what is user friendly and what is not. And I really want to hear from my co-panelists, so I'll jump to from a government perspective. Yes, I actually was at Treasury Board designing the web experience standards that is actually being used a lot nowadays, and that was a few years ago when we were sued. The Government of Canada was sued by Madame Jordan. I think that's the best thing she did, because we had a wake-up call. And that wake-up call actually led to the beginning of a culture change. The reason I say beginning, because culture change is an ongoing and continuous process, and where we are today compared to where we were about 6 to 8 years ago, it's actually a significant move forward. I have a small part to play there in actually developing the standards, and as we just said, with Bill C-81 and the new Deputy Minister for Accessibility, it's going to be leaps and bounds forward, but I'm going to let my co-panelists jump in.
To hone in on something that you just said was talking about talking to users. And this is actually a big gap in government and whether or not design research is something that we're actually doing. And we're going out at the beginning of product discovery phases and we're exploring, are we actually solving the right problem, or are we about to create more problems in different ways? And that really comes from including people with disabilities, co-creating and going along the entire journey and process. Because government has a history of doing accessibility as a bolted-on thing 2 weeks before it goes out the door. And having worked in accessibility in government for 13 years, I can say that that's very much how the practice has been. And one of the things that's key to digital transformation in government is doing that early and doing it throughout the entire process. Because if we also only do it at the beginning, we end up at an end product or end service that's not accessible. So it has to be a journey through the whole phases of what we're doing for that. And as for like covering a gap between what government could do, and it's wonderful that we have a standard on web accessibility, I would love to see it be a standard on digital accessibility. It goes further than that, that we adopt WCAG 2.1 instead of 2.0. It's been adopted by many countries already. It came out in June last year. So it's one of those things that we can actually address to start bridging the gaps in how we build more inclusive and accessible services.
So I'm a tech company, so obviously I think tech can be a great equalizer in a lot of cases. I think one of the biggest things that we've done at Microsoft is that by building accessibility features into Windows and Office 365, we've given the user the opportunity to kind of make their experience their own. You know, you can't just say, well, they have a disability, therefore everything's going to be the same for them. Each person consumes information in a different way. Perhaps they want a dark screen instead of a white screen because it allows them to consume the text on their computer screen in an easier way. Or perhaps they need assistance because they have they're hard of hearing, and so that they need a specific way to consume that information, or they need subtitles in order to follow along in a meeting. And so these are some of the functions that have been now built in that, depending on what your preferences are, you can make your experience your own experience. And by really creating that, you've put the power in the hands of the people that have a disability so that they can consume and they can be productive and they can have this technology that's there for them. Everything's a journey. I don't want to say that we're perfect, we're not, but we're trying to make these steps to get there. I'm thrilled when I saw today that the Treasury Board announced, or yesterday, an accessibility kind of strategic plan and the use of technology within the Government of Canada. Because you imagine if you were someone with a disability showing up to your first day of work and your tech doesn't work for you. How can you be productive? How can you do your job if you can't consume the information? We've been thrilled at Microsoft. We just announced a deal with the Government of Canada to bring Office 365 to the Government of Canada. And there are some really phenomenal accessibility features built right into those computers and into that software and into Windows. And we really believe that it's a way that we can differentiate the Government of Canada in terms of being able to provide that technology from day one. And the other piece, and it's not just with those with a disability, it's their colleagues, and it's that culture change that you talked about. I don't think I even fully realized just how the way I was sending information impacted my colleagues' ability to consume it. With Office 365, we've built in templates that are already accessible. So you just have to use one of those templates and it will work for a screen reader. We have a function called Accessibility Checker, which is just simply like a spell checker, how you would check for an email or a document for spell checking. Well, now you can check it for accessibility, because those, you know, when you see headers at the top, you know, header 1, header 2, that's how a screen reader tells someone who has a visual impairment that, oh, it's the start of a new section, that it's the start of a new paragraph. Otherwise, it's just a run-on. And now with this feature built into Office 365, we can identify those issues so that when I send an email or I send a document to a colleague, that it's accessible right from the get-go. Because oftentimes, disabilities are hidden. People don't disclose. They may not tell you that they have a visual impairment or they are hard of hearing. And so you try to make it so that all of your products, and that's a culture shift for everyone. And I look to my government colleagues because I'm sure you understand completely of getting people's minds around that.
I fear that when my panelists are going to speak before me, I won't have much to say, it seems.
I like you, Thomas. We have a lot of comments.
Yeah. I think we can all agree technology is fantastic, but when it's not created with a disability lens in mind, with people with disabilities being part of the creation, it's going to cause so many headaches for anyone who's trying to use it. There's a saying in the disability community, nothing about us without us, and I think that has to be part of every single facet of society, including the creation of technology. People with disabilities should be part of, testing, user testing, to make sure that what their needs are incorporated into any technology, whether it is, software, whether it's the creation of new cell phones, whether it's trying to use a point-of-sale terminal. We have to make sure that people with disabilities are incorporated into those processes so that their needs are met. Secondly, we have to make sure that people with disabilities who are doing the user testing are compensated fairly for that testing, because they're experts in doing what they're doing. The government loves to pay thousands of dollars for, big, smart, thinking people to provide their advice. Sometimes it's used, sometimes it's not. And they get paid so much money. Where people with disabilities, they struggle to try and even get part-time employment. We should be compensating them fairly for their services that they're providing.
I noticed Julianna's gotten something to say, perhaps?
I'm nodding in agreement. There's been a lot of talk about what we can do policy-wise, that we can do that in an ethical way. The other thing is the accessible strategy for the public service was just released yesterday, and part of that actually talks about an accessible innovation lab and the fact that the government of Canada has now committed to hiring 5,000 more people with disabilities. So we need to ensure that some of those positions are going to people who want to do that type of role, but they have to want to do that type of role. We can't be asking colleagues to go and do testing because they're the person who's in a wheelchair or the person that's next to us that's blind. This has to be something that is actually a purposeful and deliberate decision, so that we're actually respecting the fact that these people have degrees in education and areas they want to work in and thrive. And so there are things that we have to consider when we do that, to do it in an ethical and holistic way. But it's definitely probably one of the biggest challenges we have to tackle when we say we want to do design research, we want to test with users, we want to bring people along on the journey. Well, what does that actually look like?
Vidya, do you also want a word in edgewise?
Oh, I think I'm good for now.
So I'd like to take just a quick second and make the idea of accessible technologies that are digitally backed a little bit more real. I think Marlene's example was a very good one about Office 360 and the headers being read aloud. I'm wondering if you others could also offer perhaps a small example of what it would look like to use technology for accessibility so that our audience can understand. And Thomas, I'm absolutely going to allow you to go first this time.
Okay, Thomas can go first.
All right, thank you. I have a smartphone that, thanks to the use of beacon technology, someone who is blind or partially sighted in City Hall can use their smartphone to navigate independently throughout the building. There are beacons set up in City Hall so that they can put their earbuds into their phone, and their phone will talk to them. It'll say, in 300 meters, there will be 2 halls, one going left, one going right. On your left is, a statue or something. This beacon technology is trying to change the way that people who are blind or partially sighted integrate themselves independently in our society. Because of such beacon technology, they can independently navigate without the use of a sighted guide, without having to wait until someone who can see can help them take them around a building. And so I think that's one such example that I'm pretty excited about, because it integrates digital technology in the most accessible way to do the very basic things that people who are blind or partially sighted wouldn't be able to do.
So I have 2 things. One is, and to build off yours, is Microsoft created an app called Seeing AI. And I think this is probably one of the really best examples I've seen of AI in use for good. So Seeing AI is a free app, I think one of the most downloaded app by people who are blind or partially sighted. And it allows them to take using the camera on their phone, their smartphone, to consume the audience around them. So imagine you are in the United States. This is my favorite example. The United States, their color of their money is all the same. It's not like Canada where you can choose. If you can see color, you can choose. That's a $10 bill, a $20 bill. You can take a picture of the of the dollar that you have, and it will tell you that it is a $20 US bill, that it is a $5 US bill. It'll take a picture of a menu, and it will describe for all the different pieces on the menu. So this is using AI at its best. You can take a picture of the person in front of you, and it'll say, you know, handsome man in plaid pants and great socks, right? So, but it'll say, you know, man sitting smiling. So those are some uses of AI. The second one I want to talk about is actually, I don't know if anyone's a gamer or has a child or someone in their life that's a gamer. Microsoft just announced, so Microsoft also owns Xbox, and we launched just before Christmas what we call the adaptive controller. And what this is a controller that you can make your own for people with disabilities so that they can game. So you can imagine if you're a kid and you have a physical disability, perhaps you don't have use of one hand. Well, it's hard to game, right? Like, you got a controller and you got to, like, I don't know, I'm not a gamer. You're trying to press all the buttons. You got, like, well, now the adaptive controller, you can use your feet, you can use your elbow. It's made in a way that it equals the playing field. So now when you're in the 5th grade and you're on Xbox Live trying to play with your friends down the street, it does not matter that you don't have use of that hand, because you're just as great of a video game player as your buddy. And so I encourage you, there's a great ad that we did that played at the Super Bowl. It was our Super Bowl ad, was on the adaptive controller. So it's, you know, it's just one way of leveling the playing field that's beyond just the workplace.
I'm actually going to take a slightly different perspective, in so much as that I spent 2 years working in a program called the Accessibility, Accommodation, and Adaptive Computer Technology Program at Shared Services Canada. And the host of different types of emerging and changing technology that's out there for cross-disability types is astounding. And they just get better and better. And we integrate and do things differently. So like with the Microsoft Xbox controller, you can just remap all the controls so you can have access to all the functions in a way that you can access. But we have access to all of those types of tools, and the biggest thing that we need to see in government is the accommodation to actually go out and get the tools without it being a difficult thing, and having the approvals and support in the workplace to do that. Because for someone like myself, you might not notice or know that I have an autoimmune disorder and a chronic illness. I use an ergonomic keyboard, a vertical mouse, and I use Dragon Naturally Speaking for voice recognition. So I have really severe arthritis in my hands. It hurts to actually just even hold this mic. So there are different types of technology that we consume at different times that we might not even realize are supporting for assistive technology. And it's across discipline, and it's across whether or not it's hardware, software, and how we interact and how we use it. And it makes the ability for people to adapt and thrive in their situation significantly easier. The Canadian Digital Service actually in January hosted a panel on persons with disabilities in government, where we had 5 different people with 5 different types of disability come and talk to us. And one of the key things that was asked was, do you think that technology is going to benefit you in the future for your accessibility needs? And every single one talked about the fact that it was, and that it was already improving their lives. Because we had somebody with cerebral palsy who has very limited gross and fine motor skill, and he talked about the fact that he no longer needed his care attendant to open his mail with his private and confidential information. He now could go and do it digitally, and it actually worked with a keyboard, and he could access all the information without having to feel compromised or share something he didn't feel he wanted to share. And that's the kind of impact we can have just by making sure what we build is accessible and can work with adaptive technology.
Some great examples, and I think I'm going to give 2 very varied ones. One is from a former job of mine at ESDC, where I had the Accessibility Center of Expertise. Everything that ESDC does is citizen-facing, and citizens who live in very remote parts of the country. And apart from many of them being technologically challenged, you add on top of that different languages, because we're speaking about, again, indigenous communities, as well as disabilities. As you mentioned, is that the number of disabilities are, they are among us. Some of them are hidden, some of them are invisible, but some of them are very visible. So the Accessibility Center of Expertise, we invested in it. we invested in the tools that not only are just available in the market, but also I'm going to add here is Canadian-made tools. So in my current job in the innovation department, I get a chance to meet a lot of small business innovators across the country. Oh my God, they have come up with some amazing solutions, specifically in the accessibility realm, because programming is not that expensive. And creative thinking is also not expensive because it's actually a passion. So when you put those two together, Canadian innovators have come up with some amazing solutions. I won't go into details of which ones because many of them I'm sure are in the midst of getting patents, etc. So that is one example I have to say, is that from a government perspective, how we can tap more and more into small innovators and then start integrating them with the existing products that we have, such as, whether Microsoft is of course way ahead in accessibility, but not all solutions are, so where we need to. But I'm going to now switch gears to a very different example. And I don't know how many of you are aware that here in Ottawa, we actually have an autonomous vehicle track now. The reason I take this example is, now this is like fast forward, because this is where AI is really becoming live, is becoming real in Ottawa. And for those of you who've had a chance to see it, you know what I'm talking about, but those who haven't, this is not far from Algonquin College area there, and we are bringing AI to the forefront. And I know that we're all aware of autonomous vehicles, but actually having the test facility right here in Ottawa, and not only does it increase our, I would say, the day-to-day discussions on AI, but actually making AI real, which is a common theme now in the government as to how can we actually bring AI right to the forefront. Small example that we're doing here at ISED is just when you mentioned, Thomas, about how this building is accessible, is we just invested in some very low-tech chatbot. It's huge is because many of our users, they call the call center just because they're actually not able to, because of number of disabilities, they're actually not able to navigate and find the information. Now they use Speak. Now this is solving an issue for one segment, but it's at least moving us forward a little bit. But from a government perspective, I have to say is there's a lot we can do, and we have started. So it's more sessions such as these and more ideas that we get from panels such as these is going to springboard us forward.
It's very interesting because you hear about new innovations that might be able to improve the accessibility of the built environment or the wider society that we live in. But there's also a question of access to greater access of a sort. So we might find the City of Ottawa has place markers which allow digital enhanced navigation, or there may be a startup which has a particularly novel invention that might have huge implications for the community of people with disabilities. But there is a question of getting that into the hands of everyone who might be able to need it. Some of the barriers might be technical, they might be market-based. From your experience, what are the most major barriers to promoting the wider adoption of technologies that would promote accessibility?
I can start on this one. So one of the jobs I have, or one of the items that I have on my plate is digital adoption across the country. I actually run surveys with StatsCan. And it's not as nice as it is in Ottawa and Toronto and Montreal, where we have, I would say, unlimited access, lots of digital available for us. And when I speak digital, because it really starts with actually having network connectivity, having access to devices. This is just from an infrastructure perspective, and then it becomes, of course, the different tools and the experience. But if you don't have the infrastructure, you're not going to have the experience. You need the infrastructure for the experience. And from an access perspective, across the country, it is a very, very varied landscape. The big cities, of course, that are, all the big hubs, we are fine. But the more and more we get into the remote areas, or even 100 kilometers away from the big cities, it's a very different picture. And this is where accessibility becomes a huge issue, because if you're designing experiences that cannot actually even be experienced when you're living up in Iqaluit or Whitehorse, which I have been I would say as late as last year, it becomes a challenge. How do you actually access services from locations where you can't even press a button for you to wait a minute to actually get a reaction? So when you add on top of that physical disabilities or even the invisible disabilities, it actually makes your experience quite painful. So small things that we're doing from a digital access is from an infrastructure perspective. This is both Infrastructure Canada as well as my department. We are actually going to be providing $10 internet. This is just one example, but that is just from an access, from a, I would say, remuneration perspective, but significantly expanding the digital infrastructure across the country. It's a start. We've made some progress, but this will continue because without that, the experience, which is what I live in, the experience phase, is not possible.
Actually, to elaborate on what you said, I live in the Pontiac. It's only 60 kilometers from Ottawa. I did a test on the access to my internet. It is the equivalent as if I lived in the Yukon. So you don't have to go very far for it to be remote and not work. So from a tech perspective for accessibility, when you have the infrastructure, you also have to make sure what we're creating is performant. It's going to actually be something that renders and loads that people can actually use, but then can they actually interact with it? And there's a big push about like testing with automated accessibility tools. But as far as I'm aware, for anything I've ever researched in combination, the closest you get is between 30 and 50% that can be tested with automation. Whether it's AI, whether it's browser plugins, whether it's something that's running in continuous integration. So people have to be aware that there's manual testing. Can you test with a keyboard? If you test with adaptive technology, does it give you meaningful information? And that doesn't mean test with someone's adaptive technology and say you've done testing with assistive tech and that's what you have to do. You still need to actually go out and test and do usability testing with users on whether or not they actually can still navigate it. Because one of the core things I learned really early on was that people with disabilities are not all alike. And I worked in a team where one person was blind at birth, one person lost their eyesight in their 30s, and the other was low vision. The person blind from birth read Braille and used the screen reader to orient themselves. The person who lost their eyesight later in life almost exclusively used the screen reader because they weren't proficient with Braille. And the person who had low vision used high contrast and screen magnification. So there was no average or medium or normative user. Everyone was different. And that's why when we build the standards, we test with users, we do the right research, we're going to improve the accessibility that comes with having the access to the infrastructure.
So yes, I agree. Well, first off, if we don't have equal access to the internet, then we have a problem, right? So as we get into things like, the use of cloud computing and artificial intelligence, but if people can't access the internet, then we have a fundamental problem. And so I agree completely. The other piece is, right now, I can speak for us, is really using the technology and that digital adoption. And Canada's bad at this. We are really bad at digital adoption generally across small and medium-sized businesses, governments, and that we need to get better at this because those that digitally adopt are going to move forward the fastest. I'm sure that Windows XP was a really great operating system in 2001 when it was released, but that was 18 years ago. And I can guarantee, I think I saw it running on someone's computer, it's 18 years of age. That was 7 years before the iPhone came out or 5 years before the iPhone came out. Can you imagine keeping your first version of your iPhone? So we need to get folks into that idea of you need to keep adopting technology. With Office 365, because it's now a subscriber based on the cloud, those accessibility functions we're constantly putting in there and it's automatically getting updated. So when new functionalities or better functionalities is getting pushed to people. And then we have websites where it allows people the information of how they can set up their systems. But we also have phone numbers they can call. We have agents that are able to use sign language, so we can actually have conversations with people. Using bots, Skype for Business now has a subtitle function that's built right in, so you can subtitle while you're talking to someone, so someone that's deaf or hard of hearing. So once again, it's about digital adoption, internet, obviously, but yeah, if you have Windows XP, it's time to get a new operating system.
When we talk about technology, CNIB, we talk about it using 3 A's. Technology needs to be affordable, available, and accessible. Without any of those A's, people with sight loss are just not going to be able to use it as they can. We can talk about digital adaptation and making sure that everyone is having the best and newest technology available. But for people with sight loss, because of the low employment rate, it's just not there for some people. In Canada, we believe that 28% of people with sight loss have a full-time job. Of those people in Canada with sight loss, half of them are making under $20,000 a year. So how are you supposed to then get a smartphone, make sure you're paying for internet wherever you are in the country, whether you're in an urban setting or rural and remote community, and then make sure that you're also then creating or buying the technology and the add-ons to ensure that you're getting the most accessible technology for yourself. It's just those costs add up, including then your other costs of living. So at CNIB, we're offering a program that we're quite proud of called Phone It Forward, where we're trying to ensure that each person who's blind or partially sighted who wants a smartphone gets a smartphone free of cost. So plug out, if there's any people here representing organizations who has a smartphone that they'd like to donate to CNIB, you can come talk to me afterwards and I'd love to take it from you.
Pretty cool. You've each hinted at this in some degree, but there's almost a perfect storm that converges in rural areas when it comes to accessibility, right? Like aging populations, which comes hand in hand with increasing rates of disability, low access, and low affordability. So you're all experts in your field. You come into contact with these tools regularly. Have you seen any sort of way forward, perhaps a new technology, a new tactic that really helps to address this growing deficit that we see in rural and remote communities in Canada when it comes to access?
The one that comes to mind for me, and it's more about access and digital access, is Microsoft has a program called Airband, which is a technology that uses, in rural and remote areas, the white spaces available. If anyone knows Spectrum, it's the white space that's available in the TV band. And so it's actually this brand new technology that is allowing communities that are rural and remote to have reliable internet. So we've seen really great success in this in sub-Saharan Africa, rolling out these programs. We have, throughout the US, are starting to implement them in rural and remote areas, partnering with local ISPs in order to get increased broadband connectivity. And we also are planning to roll out our first Airband project in BC, in rural and remote BC, hopefully in the next year. But this requires working with local providers, with local technology vendors. We have the technology, but it does come at a cost, right? So is this, when we look at the wired environment, wireless and internet is still very wired, and running that wire to these different communities can be very expensive. Satellite can be very expensive. Is this another way that we can look at a new technology that can potentially bring internet to rural and remote communities? It's an interesting concept, and so it's one that we're quite proud of and that we continue to roll out around the world.
Okay, hopefully we could actually promote that even more. So just a couple of things from an actual infrastructure and internet access perspective. I know that many departments in the government are doing quite a bit, but I come from the department which also has Spectrum. And so we've been, I'm not a Spectrum expert, but I can just say that 5G is something I hear in the hallways quite often, but beyond that, it really comes down to the amount of investment that is going in getting the remote areas up and running with regards to the basic infrastructure they need. And every 2 years, I run the survey. So this is not a survey that's done once in 10 years. So when we get the results, we actually know where people are being underserved. And interestingly, we also see the underserved when it comes to the infrastructure, but also the usage. There's a big gender gap there. There's a significant gender gap between the male and female population, and not only, as I said, it's from infrastructure, even if the infrastructure is available, the women population actually have very limited access. Maybe it's tools, maybe it's time to use it. So, and the further away you go from the big cities where it's equality, it's mostly equality, you really see a big difference. And this has come out quite loud and clear for us in the surveys that we've been doing. But that's, again, as I said, is one aspect that I've really noticed. And the more we do to get us up and running from an infrastructure, and also using tools so that we don't have to be still laying down wires, and if we could actually make things more wireless, etc., it would help.
I think it's interesting that we talk about like just having the basic infrastructure to do the thing, but one of the things I noticed from living in a very rural, very sprawling municipality is that we have a big gap with digital literacy. And so if your municipality's communication methods are not accessible, things are only shared on social media or only on a website, they're an image of a document that someone took as a screenshot instead of the actual text, we're putting people at a disadvantage because there are not multiple modes and operable ways to actually understand and access that information. So as much as we have that infrastructure, we need to, in parallel, be building the literacy for people to actually understand how to share and have that information be in a digestible format for people. And that's part of one of the things that you were talking about with the different modes of interaction and actually looking at anything we're creating with a service design lens. What are the consumable ways to understand that information? If we're doing digital only, or what does digital mean? Does that mean I put it on the web and that's the only way I can do it? Is there a way I can download it? Is it a document? Is it a PDF? Is there another way to listen to it? I have a document reader installed on the 3 browsers that I have installed on my computer because government text is exhausting. And so I can fold my laundry and let it just play. And we need to have a bandwidth to do that, and have it in a format that I can consume it that way. So.
I won't repeat what's already been said. This conversation about trying to access internet in rural remote communities is a very real problem. Compounded on that, then trying to live in a rural remote community as someone with a disability is even much more complicated. Through Vision Loss Rehabilitation Canada, which is the rehab side of CNIB, we're looking into how we can use technology and digital access to try and help with the rehabilitation services of people who are new to sight loss. And we're exploring this even more with Indigenous folk in the Inuit up north. How do we reach those people who don't have the access to rehabilitation services that someone in an urban setting would have? So we're looking at ways of using AI and applications to communicate with people, to do an assessment of their vision, to see how we can help them learn, independence, orientation, mobility skills in their settings. It'd be great if we could fly everyone down to an urban setting to do these things, but it's costly. And the best way to learn how to be independent in your life with someone with sight loss is to do it in your own community. So it makes no sense to bring people down to Ottawa from Nunavut, for example, when that transferable skill isn't going to be really transferable in their own communities. So we're really excited about trying to integrate with technology more as an organization to try and ensure that people get this essential rehabilitation services as they're new to sight loss in that journey, because that journey is scary. Imagine trying to navigate it without having, trained rehabilitation specialists and not having people in your community who know what it's like to go through sight loss journey. So the use of technology is something that really excites us, and hopefully we'll be able to modernize some of the work that we're doing, assuming, of course, that people have access to the internet in order to get those services, of course.
Thomas, I think you're really 2 for 2 for novel initiatives there. I'd encourage you to maybe, if you can, put up links on the hashtag so that the audience can read a bit more about these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to add is that with regards to what people can make use of is two things. We have Computers for School, and we also have a Code for Canada. So one is, of course, providing tools, and that's the Computers for School. Yes, we still provide actual computers because there are so many schools across the country where they do not even have computers. They cannot afford to buy it. But the Code for Canada that program is significantly expanding, and we're not actually expanding from a funding perspective, but not enough people applying. This is actually learning basic technology skills, not to become a high-end programmer, but basic tech skills to be able to navigate through. Because I know that when you spoke about digital literacy, it's called Code for Canada, but really speaking about basic digital skills at the entry, and then of course from there they can move forward. I just wanted to mention, I'll send those links as well.
Great. I would say it's open season on the hashtag, so if you have links to share, go ahead. Now, we've all heard that in some ways technologies are said to be biased in one form or another towards the median. I think the term that we hear most often is about AI bias, but really it does apply to a wide range of technologies. The narrative goes that technology poses a risk and that increasing technological adoption could further marginalize already vulnerable populations. Do you agree? Why or why not?
That's a tougher one.
Tough question, Mark. I don't know. I'm not afraid to say I don't know. Look, I think that we have to make a culture shift, right? And the reason that there's bias in AI is because there's bias in the data, and that the data itself is indicative of society and the way that society looks, feels, consume information. So if there is a bias in, on a technology with disabilities, it's because we need to make a shift as a society. People with disabilities are not going to stop having a disability. It's part of who they are. And we have to, instead of us asking them to change, we have to make changes to the way we provide an environment that they can live in. And it's unfair that we're creating that.
It's actually interesting because when I'm thinking about it, I think that the fact that our design and development choices are not neutral. Every choice we make with design of how we're putting something together has the opportunity to raise or lower a barrier for people. And we have to be proactively and deliberately engaging in that in order to ensure what we're doing is going to reduce those barriers and remove the bias. Because one of the things that we often hear about is, oh, I've done this new technology and it works for this one segment of people. And while that might be improving that, could we holistically make it better for other types of people, or are we forcing people to use certain channels? Because people should have the choice of the channel that best accommodates their needs and how they want to interact. And that's something we have to address in the bias in what we design and develop and release for people.
Yes, so the bias one is actually it's a very important topic and something that's dear to me. My co-panelists have already spoken about actually some very key items there. Wanted to highlight that Treasury Board has actually released the ethical AI standards, and specifically looking at bias. I was actually in a meeting with them just yesterday, because now AI is being used to actually grant visas and without going through the full check. Just one example. Or fast-track immigration applications. Because if you actually are low security risk, we don't have to be going through detailed security checks on you. Now, things have moved, technology has moved forward significantly. I'll give you a funny example. 10 years ago, and I know one of my colleagues is here who worked with me at that time, I was at Passport Canada, and we were testing facial recognition software. It couldn't recognize between multiple races. And that was in 2008, 11 years ago. And perhaps we didn't have the best software to use. Now, we never released it. So we've come way forward, because the technology has really got advanced. And now what is happening is that because all of the programming that is going behind this technology, it's being done by humans. And this is where the bias comes in. So going back to your point with regards to let's actually co-create. Let's co-create with the different segments of the population as we are programming these technologies.
Mark, I would say to your question, yes and no.
I like that.
Yeah, I thought it was a good answer. Everyone knows or can conceptualize, your great uncle who's got sight loss, who has this massive CCTV in his basement, and he goes and tries to put his piece of paper under it, blow up to make it look bigger. And there's always going to be that level of people in society who are just not going to want to adapt to technology and assistive technology. At CNIB, we're saying we should unleash that power of technology, though, so we don't have those massive, archaic pieces of technology that we're using anymore. In terms of AI, we're trying to incorporate AI into our employment preparation so that we can use apps and artificial intelligence to help people who are blind or partially sighted prepare for job interviews, prepare for having those soft skills that they need, that they may not have because they haven't had a job before. And so those are the things that we're really excited about, that we think are great and can be helpful, but we have to make sure that they're accessible to us as well.
Because I think you've mentioned it a couple of times now, and for me, I think one of the topics that when we talk about accessibility in general is we have to talk about hiring people with disabilities. And that alone will create access, right? It will force change, it will give them money and financial resources that they can buy technology, that they consume. It forces employers to find accessible products and technology, but it doesn't start unless you hire people with disabilities. And not just, and I mean a wide range of disabilities. There's no reason why, my friend Brent is here today from Live, Work, Play, and they do a great programs with the federal government of hiring people with intellectual disabilities in order for them to be doing great work in the government of Canada that's productive and worthwhile employment that gives them a paycheck, it gives them worth, it gives them a pension, it gives them all kinds of things because it raises them out of poverty as well. And so this is something that I think we all can be doing better at. Some of the things, and I always see like a Microsoft commercial, but I'm quite proud of some of the things that we're doing, is looking at how we've done our HR process. And instead of us asking people to conform to our process, we've changed our process. And I'll use the example with our autism hiring program, where we were finding there, as everyone knows, there is a lack of data scientists out there, there's a lack of coders, like we're just looking for these individuals. And we are finding that people with autism were not getting through our hiring process. So they might be PhDs in data science, but were not making it through a phone interview. They were not making it through the interview process. So we decided to say, geez, maybe it's not them, maybe it's us. And so we changed the way that we looked at our process. And so now we have an autism hiring program. It goes through a special kind of portal. We bring the candidates on campus. We train hiring managers. We train them to interview in different ways. So it's more teamwork. It's problem solving. It's seeing how they work with with their teams. And we've had some really, as you can imagine, amazing hires. Now, how do we scale that, right? Like, how do you scale that? How do you bring that to other companies? And so sharing that best practice. I don't want to say we're perfect at it. We're not. But it's something that we did in order to try to attract more people with disabilities into our workforce. Because we cannot build products for the world if our workforce does not reflect the world. And if 1 billion people in the world have a disability, then our workforce needs to reflect that. To go to your point of, you need to have the users building the products, but also thinking about it from the very beginning. So if you have someone that's a visual impairment on an engineering team, geez, that engineering team is going to think a lot more about how will my product be seen. Anyway, sorry, that's my little bit of a tangent. I like to talk about the employment piece.
Oh, that's great. It's very insightful. Thank you. Now I think it's time for any questions that we might have from the audience. So there's a microphone going around. I encourage you to give a wave.
Hi, Sarah McIntyre. I'm with BAI Communications, one of the sponsors for today. And I have just found your talk so fascinating for so many reasons. The first time I ever thought about disabilities is when my mom kind of came home from palliative care and we had to like retrofit the home. And of course it was a 1-level split, but to get up into the home were stairs and all those things. And then I, many years later, started working at George Brown College, and we were working on universal design. So very much to your talk today about designing for inclusion as opposed to having inclusion by exception. So people don't have to identify, hey, I may see things differently or understand information differently. So we went through this whole change management program with every faculty on how to present information in a variety of modes, so your students didn't have to self-identify. And the Microsoft accessibility was like the #1 seller with all the faculty, because they could go and say, okay, I'm not doing this right, and this is how I can fix it, which is a really great thing about the program. It's just not what you're doing wrong, it's what you can do to fix it. And then the last thing, which is related to CNIB, we were doing a pilot project with BAI Communications and CNIB at the St. Clair station. So we built out the Wi-Fi and cellular and Toronto subway station, and it was beacon technology, and it was for people that had visual impairments, so they could find out, oh, this elevator isn't working today, or this stairwell is not working, and plan their trip knowing based on what was actually working, as opposed to just going out and then finding, oh, this elevator doesn't work. I have to go back onto the subway and go up to another subway station and come down. And so like those are the very real world kind of changes that I think the technology is just like really exciting, and it's, you know, and it can impact a wide variety of people with disabilities, whether they're recognized or not. So hats off to Microsoft and CNIB. I think it's really exciting for everyone that's has different challenges and wants to be able to get help without actually having to self-identify that AI needs something different than what you're presenting me.
Excellent, thank you. Any particular comments on that before another question, perhaps? Do we have time for another question? Yes, good.
I just wanted to plug, because there might be some interest in this in the room, and once again, I feel like I'm a Microsoft commercial, so I totally apologize, but this one's about free money. We have, yeah, and everyone's like, excuse me, free money. So we have AI for Good. We have 3 initiatives under our AI for Good programs, which have significant pillars. So one is AI for Earth, one is AI for humanitarian efforts, and another is AI for accessibility. And it's actually providing grants to organizations, colleges, universities that are working on accessibility products and are implementing technology and AI into them. So please apply. If this is a fit, go check it out. But there's money there that will go towards. So we've just started rolling out some of those accessibility grant recipients. But yeah, I think it's like $10 million, like up for opportunity.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I figured you would. It's like Thomas, like.
And if you're actually interested in grassroots supports of accessibility in your community, and you're in Montreal, Toronto, or Ottawa, there's A11Y Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal, or Accessibility Ottawa, which is a community-run kind of event that we get together and we actually discuss accessibility barriers, talk with people with disabilities, and do presentations and talks. And there's tours, there's camps, there's conferences, so that there's a lot of actual access to that information in a grassroots kind of way.
Just 2 very quick things. One is, as I mentioned, is I have the Digital Innovation Lab where we do a lot of testing. So this is something that I think I'll go through Franca and team the next time we have big rounds of testing of our digital products, where we could actually really open it up to the community. We're always looking for people to actually co-create with us. So that would be key. Second one is, you actually mentioned it, is the digital accessibility and digital experience standards. So co-creation there as well would be fantastic.
Do we have a final question from the audience? Yes.
Hi, I work for the City of Ottawa. I'm actually the Web Accessibility Coordinator. And one of the biggest challenges that we have, if you go from the developer standpoint of creating websites and applications, is the testing portion and testing with users with disabilities. And it's easy for us to contact a CNIB, for example, get some testing done for people with, who are blind or visual impairments, but or visual disabilities, I should say. The issue for us is the catch-all. Like, we want to test with users of various disabilities as opposed to just blind users, for example. How does that become easier for not only us, but other organizations across the province who are under the AODA, and just trying to make it easier for people, and especially developers, designers, web designers, to reach out and access those groups?
That's a great question. So as a disability or someone representing a disability organization, we can always connect you with other organizations depending on what testing you want. So whether it's people with cognitive impairments or someone with a physical disability, for example, maybe someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, we have connections within the community to connect you with those people. It may not be the right person, but then they will be able to connect you as well. And I'm pretty sure the City of Ottawa has an accessibility advisory committee as well. So I'm sure the people who sit there from the community could also help as well.
It's also about cultivating relationships across areas. Like Carleton University has the Paul Mention Center. They have over 3,000 people with disabilities, and it's finding ways to actually go in and recruit participants. But there's also organizations like Fable Tech Labs and Knowability that hire people with disabilities to come in and do testing for you. So there's a variety of ways that you can try to increase that, but a lot of it comes with cultivating relationships, building partnerships, and engaging across sectors.
All right, I'll take the last word very quickly there. A huge round of applause to our panel, please. And again, if you're interested in reading more, I think we'll all put some resources up on the hashtag. Thanks again.